Usually when you look at a map, right, like whether it's an old paper atlas or you're just sort of scrolling around on your phone, there's this implicit expectation of objective reality.
Right, yeah, you expect it to be accurate.
Exactly. It's like
Yeah.
you're engaging in this cartographic contract. Blue means water, the squiggly lines are rivers, the green patches are forests.
But all categorized and charted out for us.
Right. The map maker is basically pointing at the representation and saying to you, there it is. That's the truth of the terrain.
Yeah, we rely on that. I mean, we really like the physical world to be visible and measured. It gives us a sense of control over our environment.
Totally. But then you take your finger and you pan over the map of the Nevada desert.
Yeah, here we go.
Right. You drag the screen just a little bit north of Las Vegas, and suddenly that entire cartographic contract it's completely
It
shattered.
just disappeared.
It does. You're looking at this massive blank void. It's a place where geography and topography are supposed to be rendered in detail, but instead you just get this purposeful, glaring omission.
It really is the ultimate cartographic lie.
Right.
Just this deliberate black hole dropped right in the middle of the American Southwest.
Yeah.
And, because nature completely abhors a vacuum, that specific blank space has generated more mythology, more wild speculation, and just more intense cultural obsession than almost any other coordinate on planet Earth.
It's wild, and that is exactly why today we are taking you right into the center of that black hole. Welcome to this deep dive.
Let's get into it.
We're talking about Area 51, basically the most famous military installation in human history that for decades officially didn't even exist.
Officially, right.
Right. And we're going to rip up that sanitized map today. We've got a massive stack of sources for this one. We're looking at newly declassified CIA files, some really brilliant academic analyses. Like there's this one called the Architecture of Shadows report.
Oh, that report is fantastic.
Yeah. It really is. Plus, we're pulling historical accounts straight from the F-117 Stealth Fighter Association and some deep dive open source intelligence from the Area 51 community.
Those Reddit guys do not mess around.
They really don't. And, of course, we are synthesizing all of this with the absolute cutting-edge defense reporting from the late 2025 and 2026 congressional UAP hearings.
Which is where things just get completely insane.
Oh, totally. We're going to reconstruct what actually happened out there because, for you listening, our mission today is to completely strip away that Hollywood mythology, the little green men, the flying saucers.
Right. We want to look at the reality because the reality of what occurred in that desert is actually so much more compelling than the pop culture caricatures.
Definitely.
We want to reveal the staggering, almost incomprehensible real-world engineering miracles that were birthed on those salt flats, and also the deeply tragic human costs of maintaining that absolute level of suffocating secrecy.
Because there is a real cost. And, if you're listening to this right now and you're just trying to figure out what is going on with all the insane news lately.
The whistleblowers, the leaked video.
Exactly. The congressional whistleblowers in these videos of unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAPs. We are going to explore how the military's 70-year history of intentional misdirection at Area 51 perfectly sets the stage for the explosive testimonies we are seeing right now.
Yeah, you really can't understand the 2025 and 2026 UAP disclosures without looking through the historical playbook of deception they developed in Nevada. It's the exact same lens.
It's all connected. Let's unpack this, because the verifiable truth behind Area 51 involves obscure Soviet mathematics, a wooden model that literally blinded multi-million-dollar radar systems, a devastating 1994 environmental lawsuit, and
that recent video.
Yes, the video of a U.S. drone firing a Hellfire missile at an unexplained orb off the coast of Yemen.
It's a lot to cover.
It is. But before we can even touch the advanced technology or the modern congressional hearings, we have to start with the physical reality of the place. I mean, how do you even hide a massive military base in the modern age?
Well, you have to go all the way back to 1955 for that.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So the geopolitical stakes of the Cold War are at an absolute fever pitch, and the CIA desperately needs a place to test a new, highly classified spy plane.
Right. This is Project Aquatone.
Exactly. The development of the Lockheed U-2 strategic reconnaissance aircraft. And this plane was designed to fly incredibly high, right over the Soviet Union, taking photographs of their nuclear missile facilities.
And obviously you can't exactly test something that sensitive at, Edwards Air Force Base in California?
No, absolutely not. You've got guys with binoculars hanging out near the fence line at Edwards. The secrecy requirements here were totally unprecedented.
Right.
So the director of the U-2 project for the CIA was this guy, Richard M. Bissell Jr. And he understood that they needed a testing ground that was totally isolated. It had to be entirely self-contained and nationally guarded by the terrain itself.
So what does he do?
He and Lockheed's legendary chief aerospace designer, Kelly Johnson, they go on a scouting mission.
I love this part. They're flying over the barren Nevada desert in this little twin-engine Beechcraft plane, right?
Yeah, just the two of them looking out the windows.
And they are specifically flying over the Nevada test site, which is already restricted airspace because that's where the Department of Energy is out there literally blowing up nuclear weapons.
Right, it's already a no-go zone.
Right.
And Bissell, he remembered this little X-shaped dirt landing strip he'd seen during his previous involvement with the nuclear weapons program.
Okay.
It was the abandoned Indian Springs Airfield Auxiliary No. 1. But by the time they flew over it in 1955, the desert had completely reclaimed it. It was totally reverted to sand and scrub brush.
Just gone.
Basically. But right next to it, gleaming in the sun, was Groom Dry Lake.
The salt flats?
Exactly.
And if you've never actually seen a dry lake bed in the desert, it just looks like an ocean of pure, white, cracked earth. It is completely, perfectly flat.
And Kelly Johnson looks down at that dry lake bed, and he just experiences this moment of pure engineering serendipity.
Yeah.
He realized it wasn't just a patch of dirt. It was a perfect natural landing field. In his own logs, he wrote that it was as smooth as a billiard table without anything being done to it.
Wow. Smooth as a billiard table.
So they actually landed their Beechcraft right on the lake bed, right then and there. Johnson gets out, walks onto the blinding white salt, and he uses a standard hand compass to lay out the direction of the very first runway.
See, I just love the sheer cowboy nature of that origin story, you know? The chief designer of the most advanced spy plane on Earth just walking around in the scorching desert heat with a pocket compass, pointing and saying, yeah, we'll pave it right here.
It's incredible, and the geography really was perfect for what they needed. Groom Lake is situated right in the Emigrant Valley.
Right.
And it's ringed by these imposing mountain ranges. You've got the Groom Range to the north, the Papoose Range to the south.
So even if someone wanted to snoop around.
Yeah, even if you somehow hiked through miles of deadly irradiated desert, the mountains naturally shielded the runway from any prying eyes on the ground.
But, I mean, that isolation is a double-edged sword, right? The isolation that makes it secure also makes it a total logistical nightmare for personnel.
Oh, absolutely.
Because how do you get highly educated engineers, mechanics, support staff? How do you get them to voluntarily move to a barren 115-degree desert wasteland? Especially when it's right next door to an active nuclear test site.
Where radioactive fallout is a genuine everyday concern.
Right. That is a very tough sell for an HR department.
Which brings us to the brilliant administrative shell game they played. Because you have to sell the sizzle, even if the steak is literally radioactive.
Right. So what do they call it?
Well, Kelly Johnson famously nicknamed the site Paradise Ranch to try and lure the Lockheed workers out there. He wanted it to sound like this rustic, exclusive getaway.
Come work at Paradise Ranch. Enjoy the searing heat, the total lack of modern amenities, and, the occasional rumble of a subterranean atomic bomb. It's hilarious. It's just complete false advertising.
It really is, and the workers eventually just shortened it to the ranch. But the CIA, they needed an official, sterile designation for their paperwork, right?
Of course.
So they referred to the facility as Watertown. And the running theory is that it was named after the birthplace of the CIA director at the time, Allen Dulles, who was from Watertown, New York.
Okay, so we have Paradise Ranch, we have Watertown, but where does the name Area 51 actually come from? Because everyone thinks it's this mystical sci-fi designation.
It's actually the most boring explanation possible. It was literally just a grid coordinate.
Just a map coordinate.
Yeah, it likely came from the old Atomic Energy Commission numbering grid for the Nevada test site parcels. It's just parcel number 51.
That is so anticlimactic. But, that shell game, that sort of administrative hiding, it actually continues to this day, especially in modern aviation databases.
Right. Because if a civilian pilot is flying across the country, their navigation software has to know what airfields exist, even the secret ones.
Just to keep planes from crashing into each other?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in the modern aviation system, the base is designated as KXTA, or Homey Airport.
Homey Airport.
Yeah. And the government tries to keep that code quietly buried in the back end of the flight software. But in 2007, there was this software update error, and it caused that KXTA designation to accidentally leak into the public Jeppesen aviation database.
And that's the database used by civilian pilots all over the world.
Right. So suddenly, guys flying little Cessna 172s are seeing a massive airfield pop up on their GPS screens, right in the middle of that Nevada blank spot.
Oh, man. The military must have freaked out.
They did. The Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association had to frantically issue these explicit dire warnings to student pilots. They sent out bulletins essentially saying, do not use KXTA as a waypoint. Do not attempt to establish radio contact. Just do not fly near it.
Because the airspace above Groom Lake is, it's arguably the most fiercely protected and heavily restricted patch of sky in the entire world.
The military refers to it simply as the box.
The box.
Officially, it's restricted area 4808 North, and it is closed continuously.
Right.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week, at all altitudes, from the desert floor all the way up into the stratosphere.
And they do not mess around with it.
Not at all. To give you an idea of how seriously they take this, military fighter pilots from the adjacent Nellis Air Force Range conduct intense combat training right next door, right?
Yeah.
If one of those highly decorated military pilots makes a navigation error and their wingtip so much as clips the invisible border of the box, they risk severe disciplinary action. Grounding, endless interrogations. It is career-ending.
Wow. So the sky is totally locked down. But on the ground, the perimeter security has almost taken on a life of its own in internet culture.
Oh, the camo dudes.
Right. Because they don't just have standard guys in uniform standing at a chain link fence. The physical perimeter security is entirely outsourced.
Yeah, it provides the government with this nice layer of plausible deniability and bureaucratic distance. The perimeter is guarded by private contractors working for defense conglomerates like EG&G or Wackenhut.
And the internet affectionately calls them the camo dudes.
Camo dudes. They patrol the dirt roads surrounding the borders in these unmarked Humvees and white Ford F-150 pickup trucks.
Right.
And they are heavily armed, usually carrying M16 rifles or modern tactical equivalents. They wear desert camouflage with no rank insignia and no name tags, totally anonymous.
But, from all the accounts we have in our sources, especially from the Area 51 investigators who actually go out there to document the borders, these guards rarely engage violently, right? Like, they don't just open fire on tourists taking selfies near the warning sign.
No. Their primary tactic is intimidation and surveillance. If you drive your car up to one of the warning signs on Groom Lake Road, you will usually see a white pickup truck parked on a ridge a few hundred yards away.
God, watching you.
Yeah, the guards just sit there,
Yeah.
staring at you through high-powered binoculars. And if you actually cross the invisible line past the signs, they don't immediately arrest you themselves.
What do they do?
They radio the Lincoln County Sheriff's Department. The local sheriff drives out, arrests you for trespassing, slaps you with a $600 fine, and then you might get a deeply uncomfortable follow-up visit from the FBI.
So the guys in the trucks, the camo dudes, they're really just the visible deterrent.
Exactly. The actual security network is totally invisible. The desert valleys surrounding the base are completely seeded with buried motion sensors, magnetic anomaly detectors, seismic listening devices.
Wow.
Long before you even see a warning sign or a truck, an operator in a control room knows exactly where you are. They can literally look at the seismic signature and tell the difference between a desert coyote walking through the brush and the heavy, rhythmic footstep of a human being.
That is wild. Which actually brings up an incredible logistical challenge. If the perimeter is that locked down and the site is that isolated in the desert, how do you get thousands of engineers, janitors, cooks, and scientists to work every single day?
Right, because you can't exactly have a line of 2,000 Honda Civics driving 2 hours deep into a restricted desert highway every morning.
Traffic alone would be a massive security vulnerability. People would just follow the cars.
So the government created a shadow airline.
A shadow airline.
Yes, it is unofficially known by its radio call sign, which is Janet.
Just another non-existent terminal.
Exactly. The Janet flights are a fleet of completely unmarked Boeing 737s. The only identifying feature is a single, thick red stripe painted down the side of the fuselage.
No logos, no airline names.
Nothing. And they operate out of a heavily guarded private terminal situated right on the edge of Harry Reid International Airport in Las Vegas. So every morning, between 1,000 and 2,000 workers park their cars in Las Vegas, walk into this private terminal, board an unmarked 737, and are ferried directly into the heart of the black site.
I try to imagine that commute, You're sitting on a commercial airliner, in your business, casual clothes, flying over the mountains, landing on a secret runway. You do your highly classified engineering work for 8 hours, and then you fly back to Vegas in time to pick up your kids from soccer practice.
And the craziest part, you can never ever tell your spouse what you did that day.
It's mind-boggling. But here is where that massive, impenetrable wall of security runs into the reality of modern technology.
Satellites.
Right. You can put sensors in the dirt, you can hire private mercenaries, you can fly people in on secret planes, but you cannot hide a multi-mile runway carved into the desert floor from the cold, unblinking eye of a satellite in space.
The geographic footprint is simply too large. You can't hide it. And the CIA knew this from the very beginning, which perfectly sets up the incredible friction of the 1974 Skylab incident.
Okay, yes, let's dive into this, because this perfectly illustrates the absolute bureaucratic absurdity of absolute secrecy. So it's 1974.
Right.
The Skylab 4 astronauts are up in orbit hundreds of miles above the Earth, and their mission includes taking hundreds of photographs of the Earth's surface for, like, geological and weather research.
Your standard science mission.
Exactly. But while panning over the American Southwest, they inadvertently take a photograph of Groom Lake.
And it wasn't just a minor slip-up. According to this heavily redacted but now declassified 1974 memo written to CIA Director William Colby, the intelligence community had actually provided NASA with specific, explicit coordinates representing areas that were absolutely forbidden to be photographed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the memo emphatically noted that the CIA considered no other spot on Earth to be as sensitive as Groom Lake.
So they literally gave the astronauts a do not look here list, and the astronauts accidentally looked. So this blurry photograph comes back to Earth, and it sparks an absolute bureaucratic civil war between the agencies. Because NASA operates on a mandate of public scientific discovery.
Right, they just want to publish it.
Yeah. They want to process the film and release the photo into the public archives, along with thousands of other pictures of clouds and mountains. But the CIA and the Department of Defense go into a state of total panic.
Total panic.
They are terrified that releasing this single photo will somehow compromise the installation's mission to the Soviet Union.
And the academic analysis we reviewed, that Architecture of Shadows report, it frames this beautifully. It calls this the paradox of visibility.
Explain that.
Well, the United States intelligence apparatus was fully aware that the physical structures at Groom Lake were visible from low Earth orbit. I mean, on that very memo complaining about the Skylab photo, CIO Director William Colby scribbled a handwritten note in the margins.
What did he write?
He wrote, USSR has it from own sats, meaning Colby knew for a fact that Soviet Cosmos spy satellites already had high-resolution pictures of the base.
Okay, this is where I have to push back on the sources a bit, because the logic here feels completely broken.
How so?
It's like pitching a massive circus tent over an elephant in the middle of a city square and legally requiring everyone in town to call it a camping trip. The government knows the Soviets can see the elephant's trunk sticking out under the canvas.
Right.
And the Soviets know, the Americans know they can see it. So if Soviet military intelligence already possesses highly detailed top-down imagery of the massive 23,300-foot runway, which was specially extended for classified testing, by the way, why did the CIA fight NASA so viciously over one blurry, unclassified astronaut photo?
That seems counterintuitive.
It does. What tactical advantage do you possibly gain from maintaining a known secret?
To understand that, you really have to understand the fundamental nature of information control in a democracy. It was never about hiding the physical buildings from the Kremlin. As you said, the Kremlin already had the architectural layout. The fight over the Skylab photo was about denying the American public, the American media, and the United States Congress the administrative hook necessary to ask legally binding questions.
The administrative hook?
Yes. If NASA, which is a federal agency, officially publishes a photograph of a secret military base, the United States government is formally, legally acknowledging that the facility exists.
Ah, I see.
And the moment the government acknowledges its existence, a domino effect begins. Journalists can start filing Freedom of Information Act or FOIA requests citing the official NASA photograph.
Right.
White House press secretaries have to answer questions about it during daily briefings. Congressional oversight committees can suddenly demand budget reports to see how much taxpayer money is flowing into this acknowledged facility.
Wow. So by suppressing the photo, they maintain the fiction of non-existence. They preserve a black hole in the budget.
Precisely. They chose to let the Skylab photo sit quietly in a secure, unclassified archive vault. They deliberately chose not to retroactively classify the photo because stamping top secret on a NASA geology photo would act like a massive neon sign pointing to its importance.
Right, it would draw more attention to it.
Exactly. They relied on obscurity. By refusing to confirm what everyone already suspected, the CIA preserved their total operational freedom. They insulated themselves from democratic oversight.
We won't officially confirm the base is there, so you lack the legal standing to ask us what we're doing inside it.
Exactly.
It is a masterpiece of bureaucratic plausible deniability. And, they needed that operational freedom desperately. Zero oversight, zero questions asked because of the staggering, physics-defying machines they were building out there on the salt flats.
That operational freedom is literally the only way you can push aerospace engineering decades past the bleeding edge.
Which brings us to the aircraft themselves.
Oh.
Because understanding how they hid the base is really only half the story.
Right, we need to look at what they were hiding.
Exactly. The urgent need to evade Soviet radar and outrun anti-aircraft missiles created aircraft that behaved so bizarrely, so far outside the realm of normal aviation, that they literally birthed the modern UFO craze.
Let's trace that technological evolution. Because following the success of the U-2 spy plane, Soviet radar networks became increasingly sophisticated.
The U-2 just wasn't cutting it anymore.
Right, the U-2 was flying high, but it was slow. The CIA needed something that flew higher and significantly faster. This led to Project Oxcart, which birthed the Lockheed A-12.
And this was the highly classified predecessor to the famous SR-71 Blackbird, right?
Yes.
Even looking at photos of the A-12 today, 80 years later, it still looks like a spacecraft. It has these massive, aggressive engines and a sleek, menacing profile.
It was an absolute engineering marvel. It was designed to cruise at speeds exceeding Mach 3. That's 3 times the speed of sound at altitudes well above 70,000 feet.
Which is insane.
But to survive the immense thermal friction of flying that fast through the atmosphere, the exterior of the plane couldn't be made of standard aircraft aluminum. It would melt. It had to be constructed almost entirely of titanium.
And there's a delicious historical irony there, right? Because where do you get enough raw titanium to build a fleet of superplanes during the Cold War?
The irony is staggering. The United States did not have sufficient domestic reserves of titanium rhodial ore.
So who had it?
The largest supplier in the world was the Soviet Union.
Wow.
So the CIA had to create this incredibly complex global network of bogus shell companies and third-party buyers to secretly purchase massive amounts of titanium from the Soviet Union, just so they could build the airplane designed specifically to spy on the Soviet Union.
They used Soviet metal to build the invisible knife that would cut through Soviet airspace. It's incredible.
It really is.
But the A-12 is also where the UFO sightings really kick into high gear in the American Southwest. And it all comes down to altitude and sunlight.
Yeah, imagine the aviation environment of the early 1960s. Commercial airline pilots flying Boeing 707s or Douglas DC-8s are cruising at maybe 20,000 to 30,000 feet. The A-12 IX card is flying at 70,000 feet, more than 7 miles above them.
So picture this. The commercial pilot is flying his route from Los Angeles to Denver in the evening. The sun has dipped below the horizon for him. The sky around his plane is pitch black.
But because the A-12 is so incredibly high up in the stratosphere, it is still in the direct path of the sun's rays. The sun hasn't set for the A-12.
Wow.
So those rays are hitting this massive, wide, disc-like titanium fuselage, and it's reflecting a brilliant, glowing light down into the darkness below.
If you are that commercial pilot sitting in the dark and suddenly a glowing silver disc-like object streaks across the sky thousands of feet above you, moving at 2,000 miles per hour, your brain cannot process that as an airplane. You are going to pick up the radio and report a UFO.
Naturally. And these reports flooded into the Federal Aviation Administration and the Air Force.
And the military knew exactly what they were seeing, right?
Oh, they knew exactly what the pilots were seeing. They had the flight logs. They knew the Oxcart was in that sector. But they absolutely could not reveal the existence of a Mach 3 titanium spy plane.
So what did they do?
They initiated Project Bellevue book protocols. They attributed the sightings to temperature inversions, ice crystals, or high-altitude weather balloons.
They willingly let the UFO rumors flourish. They let commercial pilots think they were losing their minds just to protect the classified technology. It's the perfect self-sustaining cover story.
It really is. But Area 51 wasn't just a sandbox for building and testing American planes. It was also the central hub for tearing apart the enemy's planes.
Let's talk about the foreign material exploitation programs, Because during the Cold War, it wasn't enough to just guess how fast a Soviet fighter jet could fly or how its radar worked. The U.S. desperately needed to get their hands on the actual hardware.
And Area 51 became the clandestine host for covertly acquired Soviet MiGs. The most famous early example was Project Heavy Donut in 1968.
Have donut. The military really excels at naming highly sensitive black ops projects with the most mundane phrases imaginable.
They really do.
But how do you just acquire a top-of-the-line Soviet fighter jet? You can't exactly order it from a catalog.
You rely on international espionage. In 1966, the Israeli intelligence service, Mossad, executed a brilliant operation. They orchestrated the defection of an Iraqi Air Force captain named Munir Redfa.
Okay.
He was flying a pristine, fully operational Soviet MiG-21. Redfa defected and flew the jet directly to a base in Israel.
Wow.
The Israelis evaluated it and eventually, in a secret agreement, loaned the aircraft to the United States. It was dismantled, loaded onto a transport plane, and reassembled in a hangar at Area 51.
So now we have the enemy's best fighter jet sitting on our secret salt flat. What do we do with it?
We fly it against our own planes to see who would win in a real war.
What?
The Air Force and the Navy brought their best test pilots to Groom Lake. They put American F-4 Phantoms up against the Soviet MiG-21 in mock dogfights. The airspace over Groom Lake, where these battles took place, was jokingly nicknamed Red Square.
And what were the results of these secret dogfights? I imagine the American engineers were hoping to find some fatal flaw in the Soviet design.
What they found was actually deeply concerning. The tests revealed that the planes were, dynamically speaking, incredibly evenly matched.
Really?
Yeah. The deciding factor wasn't the technology, it was the aggression and skill of the pilot.
How so? Walk me through one of those engagements.
During the Have Donut evaluations, a highly experienced Navy pilot named Doc Townsend was flying the American F-4 Phantom. He went up against various Air Force pilots who were taking turns flying the acquired MiG-21.
Okay.
Townsend, understanding the strengths of his own plane, was winning almost every engagement. He was keeping his speed up and dictating the terms of the fight.
So American technology wins.
Until another Navy test pilot, a man named Tom Cassidy, strapped into the cockpit of the Soviet MiG-21. Cassidy flew the MiG against Townsend's F-4, but Cassidy completely changed the tactics.
What did he do differently?
He was willing to push the Soviet aircraft to its absolute aerodynamic limits. Instead of fighting a flat, turning battle, Cassidy took the fight into the vertical.
Oh.
He hauled back on the stick, trading airspeed for altitude, flying the MiG right on the bleeding edge of a catastrophic stall.
She used the MiG's lighter weight to climb faster and tighter than the heavier F-4 Phantom could.
Exactly. And suddenly, Townsend looked in his mirrors, and the Soviet MiG-21 was locked dead onto his tail.
Oh, wow.
It was a wake-up call for the American military. They realized the MiG-21 was an incredibly dangerous adversary if flown by a pilot who knew how to exploit its maneuverability at lower speeds.
So the tactical takeaway was, do not get into a slow, turning knife fight with a MiG. Use the F-4's massive engines to keep your speed up, stay out of the vertical, and engage from a distance using radar-guided missiles.
Precisely. And this intelligence gathering expanded rapidly. Shortly after the MiG-21 tests in 1968, the U.S. acquired 2 Soviet MiG-17s.
How did they get those?
This happened when a pair of Syrian lieutenants made a massive navigational error and accidentally landed their jets at an airstrip in northern Israel.
I cannot get over that detail. Whoops, we took a wrong turn at Albuquerque and accidentally handed the Americans our state-of-the-art fighter jets?
It was an intelligence coup of historic proportions. The U.S.-initiated projects Have Drill and Have Ferry to test these MiG-17s at Area 51.
And what did they learn from the 17s?
The American pilots discovered that while the MiG-17 had incredibly crude, heavy flight controls that required brute physical strength to manipulate, it possessed a terrifyingly tight turning radius.
So the lessons learned in the skies over Groom Lake during these projects fundamentally changed how the United States trained its fighter pilots.
Absolutely. The Navy realized their pilots were losing the art of close-quarters dogfighting because they had become too reliant on long-range missiles. The data generated from fighting these real Soviet planes at Area 51 directly led to the Navy revitalizing its air combat maneuvering program.
Yeah.
It was the direct genesis of the United States Navy Strike Fighter Tactics Instructor Program.
Better known to the public as Top Gun.
Yes. The very foundation of Top Gun owes its existence to the secret exploitation of Soviet MiGs over a dry lake bed in Nevada.
Okay, so we're building Mach 3 titanium spy planes, we're holding secret dogfights with stolen MiGs, but the ultimate prize, the absolute holy grail of aerospace engineering at Area 51, was the quest to make an aircraft completely invisible to enemy radar.
The birth of stealth.
Yes. And this is where the historical irony goes from a gentle simmer to a full boil, because American stealth dominance was birthed from the mind of a Russian scientist.
It is arguably one of the greatest paradoxes of the Cold War. In 1962, a Russian physicist and mathematician named Pyotr Ufimtsev published a deeply dense, highly theoretical paper in the Moscow Scientific Journal.
Okay.
The paper was titled Method of Edge Waves in the Physical Theory of Diffraction.
And what was Ufimtsev proposing in this paper?
He was demonstrating mathematically how to accurately calculate the radar cross-section across the surface of a two-dimensional wing and, crucially, at its physical edges.
Let's break down how radar works just really quickly for a second.
Sure. A radar station sends out a massive burst of electromagnetic energy. If that energy hits a large, curved metal object like a traditional airplane fuselage, it bounces back in multiple directions, including right back to the radar receiver, creating a massive blip on the screen.
It's like shining a flashlight at a disco ball in a dark room, right? The light scatters everywhere, and it's impossible to miss.
Exactly. Ufimtsev's math proved that if you calculate the angles correctly, you can design a physical shape, specifically flat, highly angled surfaces, that will predictably deflect those radar waves away from the receiver, scattering them harmlessly into empty space.
Like shining a flashlight at a perfectly angled mirror. The light hits the mirror and bounces off into the corner of the room, and the person holding the flashlight sees nothing but darkness in front of them.
Precisely. But here is the catch. Ufimtsev's math was incredibly complex, and at the time, no computer existed that was powerful enough to calculate these equations for a three-dimensional object like a real airplane.
Ah.
So the Soviet military completely ignored his paper. They didn't see any practical, real-world application for it. They let it be translated and published internationally.
They just handed the keys to the kingdom to the world, and a decade later, someone in America picked up the keys.
In 1975, a brilliant software engineer and radar specialist at Lockheed's Skunk Works division named Denis Overholser stumbled across a translation of Ufimtsev's paper.
And he realizes what they missed.
Overholser realized what the Soviets had missed. He took Ufimtsev's equations and, using the immense processing power of an early Cray supercomputer, developed a groundbreaking software program called ECHO.
And ECHO allowed them to digitally model how radar waves would interact with various geometric shapes.
It was the breakthrough they needed. The computer confirmed that a shape composed entirely of flat, faceted, angled panels could theoretically achieve a radar cross-section of almost zero.
Wow.
So the Skunk Works engineers built a 10-foot-long physical model made out of wood to test the theory.
And this model looked so bizarre, so completely devoid of aerodynamic logic, that the engineers affectionately named it the hopeless diamond.
The hopeless diamond.
It literally looked like a faceted gemstone cut into the vague shape of an arrowhead. There were no smooth curves, no elegant wings, just sharp angles and flat planes.
They took this wooden hopeless diamond model out to a highly sensitive outdoor radar test range in the Mojave Desert. They mounted the model on top of a 12-foot-tall pylon, backed away, and told the radar operators to hit it with everything they had.
This is my absolute favorite anecdote from the sources. The radar operators fire up the system, they look at their scopes, and they report back to the engineers. We can't see them all.
They couldn't see it at all.
The multi-million-dollar radar system was picking up the metal pylon holding the model, but the wooden diamond itself was completely invisible to the electromagnetic waves. In fact, the operators noted that the only anomalous blip they were getting on the screen was a blackbird that had literally flown down and landed on top of the wooden model.
Incredible.
The radar could see the biological mass of a small bird, but it could not see the stealth geometry.
It was a monumental, paradigm-shifting success. That wooden model evolved into Project Have Blue E, which produced 2 flyable proof-of-concept prototypes. And the success of Have Blue E directly led to Project Senior Trend,
which resulted in the deployment of the F-117 Nighthawk,
Yes.
the iconic jet-black, jagged, bat-wing stealth fighter that shocked the world during the Gulf War when it flew completely undetected through the most heavily defended airspace in Baghdad.
But to achieve that absolute radar invisibility, the designers had to completely sacrifice traditional aerodynamics. A plane built entirely of sharp angles and flat surfaces does not want to fly. It wants to fall out of the sky. The F-117 was inherently dangerously unstable in all three axes of flight: pitch, roll, and yaw.
I mean, just look at a picture of it. It's like taking the aerodynamics of a heavy cinder block, strapping two jet engines to the back of it, and forcing it to stay airborne using pure brute force computer processing.
That is essentially what they did. To keep the F-117 in the air, Lockheed engineers had to adapt an incredibly complex fly-by-wire computer system from the F-16 fighter.
Explain fly-by-wire for a listener who might not know aviation mechanics. How does it keep a cinder block in the air?
In an older airplane, when the pilot pulls back on the control stick, a physical steel cable runs from the stick through the fuselage to the flaps on the wing, manually pulling them up.
It's mechanical.
Exactly. In a fly-by-wire system, there is no physical connection. When the pilot moves the stick, you're sending an electronic signal to a flight control computer. The computer reads the pilot's input, analyzes the current speed, altitude, and angle of the aircraft, and then electronically tells the hydraulic actuators on the wings exactly how far to move.
So the computer acts as a translator between the pilot and the plane.
In the F-117, it was more than a translator. It was a lifesaver. The aircraft was so aerodynamically unstable that if a human pilot tried to fly it manually, it would flip over and crash within seconds.
Wow.
The fly-by-wire computer had to make hundreds of micro-adjustments to the flight surfaces every single second just to maintain level flight. The pilot wasn't really flying the plane, they were just suggesting a direction to the computer, and the computer performed millions of mathematical calculations to violently force the airframe to comply.
It is an incredible technological achievement, but it also brings me to a massive pushback regarding the mythology of Area 51.
Let's hear it.
Let's put ourselves in the shoes of an average citizen in Nevada in the early 1980s. The Air Force is out at Groom Lake testing the F-117 Nighthawk. They are also testing another stealth prototype called Tacit Blue E, which was this massive, bulbous stealth plane that the engineers literally nicknamed the Whale because it looked like a flying rectangular box.
Right.
If these vehicles are so aerodynamically insane that they require advanced computer systems making hundreds of microscopic, jerky corrections every second just to keep them from tumbling out of the sky, how could a civilian looking up at the night sky possibly differentiate between a top-secret U.S. military test and an alien spacecraft from another galaxy?
The simple answer is they couldn't. It was impossible.
Yeah.
To the untrained eye, and even to trained pilots who didn't possess the necessary security clearances, these aircraft defied all known logic of aviation. Imagine seeing a shape with absolutely no curved surfaces, painted entirely radar-absorbent black, moving silently across the desert sky because its engine exhaust is heavily shielded to hide its heat signature, and making these unnatural, computer-corrected jerks as it flies.
It looks exactly like magic. It looks extraterrestrial.
The technology developed at Area 51 was so profoundly far ahead of public comprehension that it created a vacuum of understanding. And people filled that vacuum with the only narrative that made sense to them: aliens.
So we have these incredible, completely earthly planes acting bizarrely in the desert sky. And this massive wave of public speculation starts bubbling up.
People are reporting UFOs.
They're talking about government cover-ups. And instead of stepping forward and correcting the record, instead of proudly saying, look at the amazing stealth tech our engineers built, the intelligence community realizes something profound.
They realize that alien conspiracies are actually the best possible cover story for their multi-billion-dollar black budget projects.
This realization forms the absolute core of the Area 51 mythos. The government understood that a public obsessed with flying saucers is a public that isn't asking hard questions about radar cross-sections and titanium supply chains.
Exactly. Let's transition into the architecture of that myth. Because the story of Area 51's pop culture explosion doesn't actually begin at Groom Lake.
No, it doesn't.
It begins 40 years earlier, in a different state entirely, with an event that set the psychological template for the modern UFO conspiracy. We need to talk about Roswell and how the military first learned the immense value of the alien smokescreen.
Okay, so to understand the modern mythology, we have to look at the 1947 Roswell incident. The foundational story is that a flying saucer crashed on a ranch in New Mexico, and the military recovered alien bodies.
But the historical, declassified reality of Roswell is tied directly to a highly classified program called Project Mogul.
What was Project Mogul trying to achieve?
Well, in 1947, the United States was desperate to know if the Soviet Union had successfully developed a nuclear bomb. Project Mogul was an Army Air Forces initiative designed to detect Soviet nuclear tests.
How does that work?
The military engineers discovered that if a nuclear bomb detonated anywhere in the world, The low-frequency acoustic shock waves would travel thousands of miles through a specific atmospheric layer called the SOFAR channel.
Sound travels further in specific densities of air.
Exactly. So Project Mogul involved launching massive, complex trains of high-altitude weather balloons equipped with incredibly sensitive, classified acoustic microphones. The goal was to float these arrays into the upper atmosphere to listen for the rumble of Soviet nukes.
So in the summer of 1947, one of these massive mogul balloon arrays, which was constructed using bizarre materials like reflective foil, balsa wood, and neoprene, crashes on Mac Brazel's ranch outside Roswell, New Mexico.
Right.
The local military guys come out, they see this weird wreckage, and they issue that infamous initial press release claiming they have recovered a flying disc.
It was a massive blunder by the local base command. When the higher-ups in Washington realized what had happened, they went into damage control.
They had to hide the balloons.
They absolutely could not let the Soviet Union know that America was using acoustic balloons to spy on their nuclear program. So they realized the flying disc story was actually incredibly useful.
They let the press run wild with the UFO angle because a UFO story is embarrassing, but an espionage leak is a threat to national security.
They intentionally used the sensationalism of a UFO as a distraction from the sensitive acoustic sensors, and this template was incredibly effective.
But what about the alien bodies that witnesses claim to see decades later? If it was just a balloon, where did the little gray men come from?
This involves a psychological phenomenon known as memory consolidation.
Okay, explain that.
In the mid-1950s, several years after the Roswell crash, the military conducted Project High Dive. They were testing high-altitude parachute systems. They dropped dozens of anthropomorphic test dummies from balloons high over the New Mexico desert.
I've seen photos of these dummies. They had no hair, oversized heads to fit sensory equipment, and they were dressed in silvery, insulated flight suits.
Yep.
Exactly. Witnesses driving down desert highways saw military personnel in jeeps recovering these bizarre, bald, human-sized figures from the brush. Years later, when UFO researchers began interviewing people about Roswell, those witnesses unconsciously merged their memories of the 1950s test dummies with the 1947 balloon crash.
Wow.
They retrospectively associated the events.
So the military learned a very valuable lesson in New Mexico. If you want to hide a top-secret technological program, just let people think it's aliens. The public's imagination will do the heavy lifting for you.
Completely.
But the Roswell myth eventually migrated. As Groom Lake became more active, conspiracy theorists started claiming that the Roswell wreckage and the bodies were secretly moved to Area 51 for study.
And that simmering underground narrative absolutely exploded into mainstream global consciousness in November of 1989.
And it was all because of one man, Bob Lazar.
Bob Lazar is the undeniable turning point in the cultural history of Area 51. In 1989, Lazar appeared in a series of interviews with investigative reporter George Knapp on the Las Vegas television station KLAS-TV.
Lazar stepped in front of the camera and told an incredible, highly detailed story. He claimed he was a physicist who had been hired by the Department of Naval Intelligence to work at a highly classified subterranean facility to reverse engineer captured extraterrestrial spacecraft.
And what made Lazar's story so incredibly infectious was that he didn't just go on TV and say, "I saw an alien." He didn't sound like a crazy person. He provided this incredibly rich, pseudo-technical, mechanically detailed narrative. It sounded like an engineering lecture.
That level of detail is exactly why the story embedded itself so deeply in the culture. Lazar claimed he didn't work at the main Groom Lake base. He stated he worked at a secondary, even more secret facility called S4, which he said was located near Papoose Lake, about 8.5 miles south of the main Area 51 runways.
He described taking a bus with blacked-out windows from Groom Lake down to Papoose Lake. He claimed that S4 consisted of 9 hangar doors built perfectly flushed into the side of a sloped mountain, camouflaged to match the desert rock.
And inside those hangars, Lazar claimed, were 9 distinct operational flying discs of extraterrestrial origin.
He called the one he specifically worked on the Sport model. He said it was made from a seamless metal that looked like liquid titanium with no wiring, no obvious circuitry, and no visible seams.
But his most famous and ultimately most scrutinized claim was his explanation of the craft's propulsion system. Lazar, claiming to be a physicist, stated that the ships were powered by a miniature antimatter reactor.
And this reactor was fueled by a super heavy, stable element that was completely unknown to human science at the time. Element 115.
Element 115.
That term is legendary in pop culture now. It's in video games, movies, comic books. Lazar claimed that when you put this stable element 115 into the reactor and bombarded it with protons, it generated a localized gravity wave.
Right.
The ship didn't fly by pushing air like a jet. It flew by literally distorting the fabric of spacetime around it, falling into the gravity well it created, allowing it to travel across the universe instantaneously.
It was an incredibly compelling, highly imaginative science fiction narrative. But as the decades have passed, the intense scientific and historical scrutiny applied to his claims has systematically dismantled the Lazar paradigm.
Let's break down the debunking of Bob Lazar, relying on the hard evidence from our sources. Let's start with the physical location itself. S4 at Papoose Lake.
S4, as described by Lazar, simply does not exist.
It's just not there.
In the era of commercial satellite imagery, we don't have to guess anymore. Our sources, particularly the dedicated investigators on the Area 51 forums, have spent years poring over ultra-high-resolution satellite imagery from Airbus, Maxar, and Google Earth. They have mapped every square inch of the Papoose Lake Basin.
And what do they see?
Empty desert. There are no massive hangar doors built into the mountainside. There is no infrastructure to support a massive underground facility.
Nothing at all.
The only human footprint in the Papoose area consists of some faint dirt tire tracks. And, according to interviews with former security personnel, a small, rudimentary shack used occasionally for electronic warfare exercises and security shoot-don't-shoot training. There is absolutely zero physical evidence of a multi-billion-dollar subterranean UFO garage.
And then there is the glaring issue of Lazar's personal academic credentials. If you claim to be a physicist or reverse engineering alien tech, you need the receipts.
Lazar claimed to hold advanced degrees in physics and electronic technology from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, and the California Institute of Technology, Caltech.
Okay.
However, exhaustive investigations by multiple journalists and researchers have found absolutely no record of him ever attending either institution. His name is not in the yearbooks, he is not on the commencement rosters, and no professors remember him.
Now, Lazar's defense is always that the government erased his identity to discredit him. But researchers did verify that he worked at Los Alamos National Laboratory, right? He is in an old phone directory there.
He was in the directory, yes. But further investigation revealed he was not hired as a senior staff physicist. He was employed as a technician by a subcontractor named Kirk Mayer. He was working on radiation monitors, not theoretical physics.
But the absolute biggest nail in the coffin of the Lazar story, the thing that completely breaks his narrative, is the physics of element 115 itself.
The element.
Now, let me play devil's advocate here for a second, because Lazar's supporters always point to this one fact as proof he was telling the truth. When Lazar made his claims on television in 1989, element 115 did not exist on the periodic table.
True.
Science had not discovered it. But in 2003, a joint team of Russian and American scientists at the Joint Institute for Nuclear Research in Dubna actually managed to synthesize element 115 in a particle accelerator.
Yes, they did.
They eventually named it Moscovium, so Lazar's defenders scream, "Look, he predicted it 14 years before it happened. He must be telling the truth."
Couldn't they just argue that the government has access to a stable isotope of moscovium that civilian scientists just haven't figured out how to make yet? It is the most common defense of Lazar's story, but it fundamentally misunderstands how nuclear physics and atomic structure actually work. Yes, scientists synthesized element 115, moscovium, but the verified, observed scientific reality of that element contradicts every single mechanical property Lazar claimed it possessed.
Break down the science for me. Why doesn't it work?
Moscovium is a super heavy synthetic element. It has 115 protons crammed into its nucleus. Because the nucleus is so massive and densely packed, the strong nuclear force cannot hold it together. It is incredibly unstable.
So it falls apart.
When scientists synthesized it, it existed for only a few milliseconds before it underwent rapid alpha decay.
Wait, let me make sure I have my high school chemistry right. Alpha decay means the atom is literally too heavy to maintain its structural integrity, so it just violently spits out chunks of its own nucleus, right? It sheds protons and neutrons to try and become a lighter, more stable element.
Precisely. It sheds an alpha particle, 2 protons and 2 neutrons, almost instantaneously. It changes into element 113, nihonium, which then decays further. Because it decays in a fraction of a blink of an eye, you cannot machine it into a metal cone. You cannot hold it in your hand. You certainly cannot put it inside a reactor to power a spaceship.
Wow.
And furthermore, the decay process releases standard radiation, not localized space-bending gravity waves.
But what about the stable isotope argument? Could there be a version of it that doesn't decay?
Even if theoretical physicists found an isotope of moscovium that lives slightly longer, maybe a few seconds or even minutes in the island of stability, it still wouldn't behave the way Lazar described.
Why not?
To argue that a slightly different isotope of element 115 suddenly gains the macroscopic property of generating anti-gravity fields is scientifically absurd.
Hmm.
It is exactly like saying, I know that regular lead is a heavy, dull, toxic metal, but if I can just find a slightly different isotope of lead, it will magically turn into solid gold and start speaking fluent English.
That's a great way to put it.
It violates the fundamental laws of physics governing the elements surrounding it on the periodic table.
It is a phenomenal science fiction concept, but it is terrible, provably false science. Yet, despite being thoroughly debunked, Lazar's story became the absolute blueprint for modern Area 51 mythology.
It completely codified what researchers call the Lazar paradigm. His vivid descriptions of blacked-out bus rides, biometric hand scanners, hangars hidden in mountainsides, and reverse-engineered flying saucers became the cultural shorthand for government secrecy.
It's everywhere.
His narrative infected everything. It was the inspiration for the facility in the movie Independence Day. It permeated TV shows like The X-Files, and it became the foundational lore for countless video games.
And that cultural obsession reached a bizarre, hilarious peak with that internet phenomenon in 2019, the Storm Area 51 Facebook event.
Storm Area 51, they can't stop all of us. It is the perfect, absurd example of internet meme culture violently colliding with the reality of a classified military installation.
Exactly.
A college student named Maddie Roberts created a joke event on Facebook suggesting that if 1 million people just ran at the Area 51 gate simultaneously, doing the Naruto run with their arms stretched behind them to dodge the bullets, the guards couldn't stop them and they could finally see them aliens.
It was clearly a joke, but the internet took it and ran. Over 2 million people RSVP'd to this event. It became global news. The military actually had to hold press briefings and issue stern warnings that deadly force was authorized to protect the installation.
Yeah, they had to take it seriously.
So on the day of the raid, out of those 2 million RSVPs, how many actually showed up in the desert?
Fewer than 200 people actually arrived at the gates near Rachel, Nevada. It turned into a dusty, awkward tailgate party. Nobody tried to storm the fence. The camo dude sat on the hills and watched them.
So anticlimactic.
It mostly ended with a few minor trespassing warnings and one guy getting arrested for public urination. It was incredibly anticlimactic.
But if we zoom out and look at the bigger picture, this entire 60-year circus, from the Roswell balloon cover-up to the Bob Lazar Element 115 saga to the Naruto runners at the gate, this all serves a very specific, highly strategic purpose for the intelligence community.
Absolutely. Aerospace historian Peter Merlin, who has written extensively on Groom Lake, points out that the government actively utilized a strategy often referred to in intelligence circles as the Mirage Men approach.
Mirage Men.
They engaged in deliberate, sustained chicanery in the desert.
Chicanery in the desert. That is a brilliant phrase. How does the chicanery work?
By allowing and sometimes subtly encouraging the public to obsess over the mythology of captured alien saucers, the military created the ultimate impenetrable smokescreen.
Think about the misdirection there.
Right. If every journalist, every conspiracy theorist, and every documentary filmmaker is hyper-focused on looking at the empty dirt of Papoose Lake, desperately searching for Bob Lazar's alien hangars, no one is looking at the actual runways at Groom Lake. No one is asking questions about the real multi-billion-dollar tests of advanced radar profiling, autonomous stealth drones, and next-generation directed energy weapons.
It is a masterstroke of counterintelligence. The military turned internet conspiracy theorists into the unintentional, unpaid guardians of actual national security secrets. The government's implicit stance is essentially, yes, please, keep writing blogs about ET, keep looking for the spaceship, please entirely ignore the revolutionary sixth-generation stealth fighter jet we are currently rolling out of Hangar 4.
Exactly. The aliens were the perfect camouflage for the earthly engineering. But while pop culture was entirely distracted, laughing at memes and making movies about little green men, a very real, very dark, and deeply terrestrial tragedy was unfolding for the actual human beings working at Groom Lake.
We have to transition now to the darkest chapter in this history. Because the ultimate veil of secrecy, the absolute lack of oversight that allows you to build stealth fighters in the dark, has a terrible, devastating human cost.
It does.
When you exist outside the law, the people working for you lose the protection of the law. Let's talk about the 1994 environmental lawsuit.
For all the talk of high-tech marvels, sleek titanium skyplanes and invisible geometry, the day-to-day reality of maintaining a massive industrial black site involves a massive amount of toxic industrial waste.
Naturally.
And in the 1980s and early 1990s, the methods Area 51 used to dispose of its highly classified, highly toxic waste were shockingly, brutally primitive.
They didn't have high-tech incinerators with scrubbers, right? They dug massive open-pit trenches in the desert floor.
Yes. According to the harrowing details revealed in a landmark lawsuit filed in 1994, civilian contractors working at Groom Lake were tasked with disposing of tons of classified materials on a weekly basis.
And what kind of materials are we talking about here?
We're talking about highly specialized, top-secret materials. Radar-absorbent stealth coating scraped off the F-117's unknown chemical solvents, classified computer circuit boards, epoxy resins, and vast amounts of industrial plastics.
And what was the disposal protocol for these highly complex synthetic materials?
They hauled the materials out to these massive trenches, dumped them in, doused the entire pile in thousands of gallons of raw jet fuel, and lit it on fire.
That is horrific. Just imagining the sheer volume of toxic smoke that would produce.
It produced massive, billowing plumes of thick, black, acrid smoke. And because of the wind patterns in the Groom Lake Basin, that toxic smoke frequently blew directly over the base's living quarters, the hangars, and the work areas.
Oh, man.
Workers stationed downwind of these burn pits were breathing in dense, unfiltered industrial toxins on a daily basis.
And these workers were bound by such strict non-disclosure agreements that they couldn't even complain. They couldn't tell their spouses what they were breathing. They couldn't tell their own civilian doctors what was making them sick. And the medical impact was absolutely devastating, wasn't it?
The physical toll was undeniable and grotesque. The lawsuit was brought forward by 5 unnamed civilian contractors they had to file as John Does to protect their security clearances, and the widows of 2 workers who had already died, Walter Casa and Robert Frost.
They were represented by a lawyer named Jonathan Turley, right?
Right, a prominent George Washington University law professor.
What were these men suffering from before they died? What did the smoke actually do to them?
They suffered from a terrifying array of ailments. Severe, unexplainable skin conditions where lesions would erupt on their bodies, devastating respiratory illnesses, chronic coughing, and total liver and kidney failure.
And they took biopsies during the lawsuit preparation, didn't they?
Yes, during the preparation for the lawsuit, biopsies were taken from the complainants. The tissue samples were sent to be analyzed by expert biochemists at Rutgers University.
And when the biochemists looked at the cellular level, the results were horrifying.
The biochemists found dangerously high levels of incredibly toxic industrial chemicals, specifically dioxins, dibenzofuran, and trichloroethylene stored directly in the body fat of these workers.
Let's explain why that is so dangerous. Dioxins aren't just something that give you a cough. They are systemic poisons.
Extremely toxic.
When you burn synthetic polymers and plastics with jet fuel, it creates dioxins. These chemicals enter the lungs, enter the bloodstream, and they bind tightly to cellular receptors. They bioaccumulate in human fat tissue. They cause chloracne, they suppress the immune system, and they trigger massive cascading organ failure.
And that is exactly what killed Walter Kaz and Robert Frost. So, Turley files this massive lawsuit against the Air Force and the Environmental Protection Agency.
And what was the argument?
The core argument of the lawsuit was remarkably straightforward. You, the government, illegally burned hazardous waste. You poisoned your own workers. And the EPA, whose sole job is to regulate this, failed to enforce the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act.
So they wanted compensation.
The workers wanted financial compensation for their medical bills, but more importantly, they desperately wanted the Air Force to simply provide a list of the specific chemicals they had been exposed to so their doctors could attempt to treat them properly.
They just wanted the material safety data sheets. They wanted to know what was killing them. But this is where the absolute impenetrable wall of national security secrecy crashes down on them and crushes the lawsuit.
It was incredibly fast.
The government's legal defense was swift, calculated, and legally brutal.
The Air Force and the Department of Justice invoked a highly controversial, incredibly powerful legal doctrine known as the state secrets privilege.
Explain how the state secrets privilege functions in a courtroom.
The state secrets privilege allows the executive branch of the government to step into a civil lawsuit and legally block the disclosure of evidence during the discovery phase if they can convince a judge that revealing that evidence would cause significant harm to national security. In this specific case, the Air Force argued that they could not possibly reveal the chemical composition of the materials burned in the pits. Why? Because doing so would tell foreign adversaries, like the Russians or the Chinese, the exact chemical recipe of America's highly classified stealth aircraft coatings.
So it is the ultimate, inescapable bureaucratic checkmate. The government is essentially standing in a courtroom, looking at these dying workers and their widows and saying, "You cannot sue us. Because the very ash from the burn pit that proves we poisoned you is classified. The evidence of our crime is a threat to national security, therefore the crime cannot be proven."
Exactly. And the government went to extraordinary, almost absurd lengths to ensure the lawsuit could not proceed.
What else did they do?
During the depositions, Turley tried to use the base's own security manual, which outlined how to handle waste as evidence. The Air Force realized he had it, and they retroactively classified the manual. They literally stamped it top secret after the fact to make it legally inadmissible.
They changed the rules of the game while the game was being played. But the trial judge, Philip Pro, initially pushed back, right? He didn't just buy the government's argument wholesale.
Judge Pro initially ruled that the government had to provide more information. He tried to keep the lawsuit alive. But when the judicial branch pushed back, the executive branch dropped the hammer.
President Bill Clinton.
Yes. In 1995, President Clinton intervened directly. He issued a formal presidential determination. In this legally binding document, he explicitly exempted what the document coyly referred to as the Air Force's operating location near Groom Lake, Nevada, from any and all federal, state, interstate, and local environmental disclosure laws.
With the stroke of a pen, he just wiped away the legal requirement for Area 51 to comply with the EPA.
And that specific presidential determination has become a grim tradition. It has been signed and renewed annually by every subsequent president, including George W. Bush and Barack Obama. As a direct result of that presidential exemption, the lawsuit was dismissed by the courts due to a lack of evidence, because the evidence remained classified. Turley fought valiantly. He appealed the dismissal all the way up to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and they rejected it. Finally, the Supreme Court of the United States refused to even hear the case,
leaving the widows of Walter Claza and Robert Frost and the surviving sick workers with absolutely nothing. No compensation, no answers, no justice.
Nothing at all.
Let me push back on the ethics of this entire system, because this is the true darkness of the deep dive. We just spent 20 minutes marveling at how the F-117 stealth fighter was an engineering miracle. We know that stealth tech saved American pilots' lives and helped win the Gulf War.
Right.
But does the creation of a geographical zone that is entirely exempt from environmental law, exempt from labor protections, and exempt from legal oversight make these kinds of human abuses inevitable? Is the horrific toxicity of the burn pits just the required price of admission for a nation to possess the best weapons in the world?
It is the defining ethical dilemma of the black budget world. It highlights the brutal, irreconcilable friction between protecting advanced technology and protecting the citizens who actually build that technology.
Right.
From a purely cold, tactical standpoint, the Air Force lawyers were factually correct. If you publicly document the ash from the burn pits, a sophisticated foreign intelligence service could theoretically reverse engineer the molecular structure of American stealth polymers. It is a real security risk.
But ethically?
Ethically, it is indefensible. It means that the highly skilled workers building the most advanced technology on the planet at Area 51 have significantly fewer workplace health and safety protections than a teenager working the deep fryer at a local fast food restaurant.
That's a staggering comparison.
Absolute secrecy inherently removes all accountability. And historically, when a bureaucracy operates without accountability, human safety and human life almost always become secondary to the completion of the mission.
It's an incredibly dark reality, and it proves that the real, closely guarded secrets of Area 51 aren't aliens hidden in a mountain. The real secrets are the harsh, toxic realities of the military-industrial complex operating above the law.
Yeah.
But here is the massive, whiplash-inducing twist in our story. We are entering the final act. For 70 years, the United States government fiercely denied the anomalous. They used UFOs as a punchline, a convenient joke to cover up earthly spy planes and environmental crimes. But if you look at the sources from late 2025 and early 2026, the government is doing a dramatic, almost incomprehensible pivot.
We are entering the era of UAP disclosure, from myths to mandates.
Right. If you've been following the news over the past few years, it feels like the script flipped entirely overnight. The government that spent decades calling people crazy for seeing flying saucers is now holding official hearings about them. Let's start with the September 2025 House Oversight hearings.
Specifically, this was a hearing convened by the Task Force on the Declassification of Federal Secrets, chaired by Representative Anna Paulina Luna. This is a monumental shift. This wasn't a fringe panel of conspiracy theorists meeting in a hotel ballroom. This was a formal, televised congressional effort to push for absolute transparency regarding unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAPs.
And the whistleblowers they brought in to testify were not guys who made a blurry YouTube video in their backyard. These were highly credentialed, heavily vetted, active, and former military personnel, putting their careers on the line, going on the official record under oath before Congress. Let's look at the specific testimonies because the details are staggering.
First, the committee heard from Air Force veteran Jeffrey Nuccitelli. He had a pristine record serving as a military police officer for 16 years.
Right.
He testified under oath about multiple, highly disturbing incidents that occurred between 2003 and 2005 near Vandenberg Air Force Base in California, which is now Vandenberg Space Force Base.
Vandenberg is incredibly sensitive. That is where the military conducts high-stakes missile testing and launches highly classified spy satellites for the National Reconnaissance Office. What did Nuccitelli see?
He described massive, silent objects hovering over the base. Under oath, he specifically likened the size of the objects to flying buildings.
Counting buildings.
He testified that these massive craft approached military personnel, pulsing with light and moving in ways that defied conventional aerodynamics. Furthermore, he stated that these incidents were not isolated hallucinations. They were witnessed by multiple security personnel, they were formally documented, and they were reported straight up the military chain of command.
But the personnel on the ground received absolutely zero guidance on how to handle the incursions.
Exactly.
A flying building. That does not sound like a sleek aerodynamic stealth drone being tested out of Groom Lake. And Nuccitelli wasn't the only Air Force veteran. Then there was the testimony of Dylan Borland.
Borland's testimony focused less on the visual spectacle and heavily on the dark, bureaucratic retaliation he faced for trying to report it. Borland reported a close-range experience with a UAT while stationed at Langley Air Force Base in 2012.
And what happened to him?
He testified that because he attempted to report it, and because he acquired direct knowledge of legacy, hidden UAP crash retrieval programs, his military career was deliberately and systematically obstructed.
Wow.
He detailed sustained reprisals, severe workplace harassment, and coordinated efforts by his superiors to block his employment in any classified work going forward.
Which speaks directly to the culture of stigma the military has cultivated since Roswell and highlights the exact need for the whistleblower protections that Congress is currently trying to pass. But out of all the testimonies in 2025, the one that really grabbed me was the active duty Navy official.
Navy Senior Chief Petty Officer Alexander Wiggins. He is a man with 23 years of decorated service. He testified about a profound incident that occurred very recently in 2023 while he was actively serving aboard the USS Jackson, a Navy combat ship.
And what did Senior Chief Wiggins report seeing?
He observed a self-luminous, pill-shaped object what the military and the public now commonly refer to as a tic-tac object. But crucially, Wiggins testified that he watched this object emerge directly from the ocean.
From the water.
It broke the surface of the water, hovered, and then linked up in the sky with 3 other identical objects.
Wait, it emerged from the ocean, so we are talking about transmedium travel, a vehicle that can travel through the dense pressure of the ocean water and then seamlessly transition into the thin air of the atmosphere without changing its physical shape and without being crushed by the pressure differentials.
Exactly. Transmedium capability is a massive leap in physics. And Wiggins testified that after the initial orb linked up with the others, they all disappeared simultaneously, exhibiting a high, synchronized, near-instantaneous acceleration.
They vanish, with no sonic boom, no exhaust plume, no visible wings or control surfaces. And this is vital. Wiggins didn't just see this with his own eyes, did he?
No. Wiggins emphatically noted to Congress that this wasn't just a visual anomaly or a trick of the light. The physical presence and the impossible acceleration of these objects were corroborated and detected on multiple highly advanced military sensors, including the ship's Aegis radar system. During his testimony, he passionately urged Congress to mandate standardized sensor training across the fleet so the Navy can capture better, harder data on these incursions and to totally destigmatize the reporting process so sailors don't fear for their careers like Borland did.
And the 2025 hearing didn't just rely on spoken testimony. There was actual classified video footage declassified and presented in that room.
Yes, Representative Eric Burleson unveiled military footage publicly for the very first time.
Hmm.
The video showed a U.S. military MQ-9 Reaper drone, one of our most advanced hunter-killer drones, engaged in combat operations off the coast of Yemen in October 2024.
Okay.
The drone encountered a high-speed, unidentified orb. The drone operators actually engaged the object. They fired a Hellfire missile directly at the orb.
I need to pause on that. A Hellfire missile is designed to completely vaporize heavily armored tanks. It is a devastating piece of kinetic weaponry. What happens when the Hellfire hits the UAP?
According to Representative Burleson's presentation of the footage, the orb did not evade the missile. It allowed the missile to hit it, but it wasn't destroyed. The orb appeared to simply absorb the kinetic energy and the explosive force of the hit.
It absorbed it.
It remained perfectly intact, kept moving at high speed, and it actually looked like it pulled the shrapnel and debris of the missile along with it in its wake.
That is utterly mind-bending. A piece of technology absorbing a Hellfire missile is beyond anything in our known earthly arsenal. And the political momentum from these explosive testimonies didn't stop in 2025. It carried right into the executive branch in 2026.
In February 2026, President Trump issued a formal, sweeping directive to the Secretary of Defense, the Director of National Intelligence, and other federal agencies.
And what was the directive?
The mandate was clear. Begin the immediate identification, declassification, and public release of government files related to non-human intelligence and UAPs.
And this executive push followed recent, highly publicized comments from former President Obama, who went on a podcast and basically said, look, given the size of the universe, extraterrestrial life is statistically highly probable. But no, despite the rumors, we do not have dead aliens sitting in a secret underground lab at Area 51.
The central authority for managing all of this newly mandated disclosure is the Pentagon's AAR, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. They are now taking center stage, replacing the old, dismissive Project Buoy book mentality with a supposedly scientific, data-driven approach.
Okay, stop the tape, because I need to play devil's advocate here heavily. This entire narrative is giving me severe intellectual whiplash.
Let's hear it.
We literally just spent the last 45 minutes establishing, with hard historical facts, that the military spent 70 years using UFO rumors to deliberately hide their own highly classified earthly stealth planes. We know for a fact that Area 51 is the global capital of testing secret drones and next-generation weapons. So aren't these new Tic Tacs, these flying buildings, and these impervious orbs probably just the next generation of black-budget American drones being tested out of Groom Lake? Why on earth should we believe the military when they hold their hands up and say, we don't know what these are, when their entire 70-year historical playbook is based entirely on lying to the public about what they are?
It is a completely valid, deeply necessary skepticism. You cannot look at the modern UAP hearings without looking through the lens of Area 51's history of deception. To make sense of it, you have to synthesize what defense analysts call the dual-track reality of what is happening in our skies right now.
Explain the dual-track reality. Track 1 is earthly technology.
Yes. On Track 1, Area 51 is undoubtedly testing wildly advanced earthly technology right now as we speak. Defense aerospace experts strongly believe that the hangars at Groom Lake are currently housing prototypes for sixth-generation stealth fighters planes that make the F-22 look outdated.
Wow.
They are actively testing directed energy weapons like high-powered lasers. And most importantly, they're deploying highly advanced autonomous drone swarms that operate via artificial intelligence. It is highly, highly likely that a significant portion of modern UAP sightings today are just the 2026 equivalent of a civilian seeing the F-117 in 1981.
Right. If I am flying a Cessna and I see a swarm of 10 drones moving in perfect unison, communicating via AI, and perhaps using lasers or spoofing tech to trick my radar, that is going to look incredibly anomalous to me. But it's just DARPA tech from Nevada.
Absolutely. You must assume that some of this chicanery is still happening. However, you cannot ignore Track 2.
What Track 2?
Track 2 encompasses the data that completely breaks the known models of physics. The synchronized, instantaneous acceleration without sonic booms. The transmedium travel from the crushed depth of the ocean into the air without structural failure. The ability of a small orb to absorb the thermal and kinetic detonation of a Hellfire missile. The whistleblowers like Wiggins and Nuttatelli are describing a leap in physics that baffles even the Pentagon's own top engineers.
Because if it was our tech, we'd be using it everywhere.
Exactly. If the United States military secretly possessed the foundational physics knowledge required to build a tic-tac that can casually defy inertia and manipulate gravity, our entire global aerospace and energy paradigm would have shifted decades ago. We wouldn't still be relying on burning highly refined fossil fuels to power conventional jet engines. We wouldn't be fighting wars over oil if we had anti-gravity technology sitting in a hangar in Nevada.
So you're saying the military posture has actually fractured. The Pentagon is genuinely scientifically confused by some of these objects. They track two objects while they are simultaneously actively hiding the earthly track one objects.
Yes, the government realizes they can no longer maintain a blanket policy of total denial. Everyone has high-definition cameras in their pockets now, and civilian radar is too good. So they are shifting their strategy toward a managed disclosure.
Right.
They're willing to release the data on the phenomena they truly cannot explain, the transmedium orbs, while still fiercely, violently protecting the specific conventional technological secrets they were building at places like Groom Lake.
It's a strategic pivot. It's like the Pentagon is finally standing up at a press conference and admitting, okay, look, the sky actually is haunted by things we don't understand. We need your help to track them. But also, please don't look in our garage in the desert.
Precisely. They desperately want standardized sensor data from the Navy to figure out what the Tic Tacs are, but they still want the airspace over Area 51 strictly closed and heavily guarded, so nobody sees the sixth-generation fighters they need for the next geopolitical conflict.
Man, this entire journey, it is just incredible. Let's pull back and summarize where we've been today, because this isn't just a story about airplanes. It is a masterclass in how human reality gets shaped, manipulated, and discovered.
We started on the blindingly white, sun-baked salt flats of Groom Lake in 1955, a desolate patch of desert handpicked by Kelly Johnson for the U-2 spy plane simply because it was flat and hidden.
We saw how the absolute need for secrecy created a bizarre administrative shell game, the false advertising of Paradise Ranch, the sterile designation of Watertown, the accidental leak of Homey Airport. We explored the paradox of visibility, where the CIA fought vicious interagency battles to suppress a blurry Skylab photo of a base the Soviets already knew existed, just to prevent the American public from gaining the administrative hook to ask questions.
We moved through the bleeding edge of aerospace revolutions. The Mach 3 titanium-clad ox cart flying so high it reflected the sun into the dark, the secret dogfights at Red Square with stolen Soviet MiGs that birthed Top Gun, and the unbelievable, ignored mathematics of Pyotr Uzhintsev that allowed Denise Overholser and the Skunk Works to build the Hopeless Diamond, culminating in the F-117 Nighthawk, a plane so unstable it required computers to keep it from falling, but so invisible it revolutionized warfare.
And because a jet black plane shaped like a cinder block looks exactly like an alien spaceship, the myths began to swirl. We dissected the Mirage Men strategy, we saw how the military utilized the Roswell balloon crash cover-up, and eventually leaned into the thoroughly debunked pseudoscientific claims of Bob Lazar and his rapidly decaying Element 115 to intentionally distract the public. They turned UFO conspiracy theorists into free, highly motivated security guards for their stealth programs.
But we also faced the grim, tragic reality of what happens when a place exists outside the law. We detailed the 1994 lawsuit, the devastating, deadly human costs of the burn pits where workers were poisoned with dioxins from stealth coatings, and we saw the government ruthlessly invoke the state secrets privilege to deny those dying workers justice, resulting in an endless presidential exemption from environmental accountability.
And finally, we arrived at the massive, reality-altering paradigm shift of 2025 and 2026. Whistleblowers with pristine military records testifying under oath before Congress about flying buildings and transmedium Tic Tacs, official military video of orbs eating Hellfire missiles off the coast of Yemen, a concerted bipartisan push from the White House and Congress to actually open the books and declassify UAP files.
It is a vastly complex tapestry. It is woven from three distinct interwoven threads: the legitimate, world-changing history of American aerospace dominance, the grim, undeniable reality of environmental destruction and human health costs, and the persistent, vibrant psychological mythology of the unknown.
So, why does all of this history matter to you, listening to this right now? Why should you care about a dry lake bed in Nevada? Because we are living in an era of extreme information overload. An era where deep fakes, digital manipulation, and state-sponsored disinformation make it harder than ever to know what is real.
It really is.
The history of Area 51 is the ultimate, real-world case study in critical thinking. It teaches us exactly how legends are manufactured and weaponized. It shows us how real terrestrial engineering can easily masquerade as magic to the untrained eye. And it reveals the terrifying lengths a nation will go to, up to and including sacrificing its own citizens in toxic burn pits to maintain its military supremacy on the global stage.
It forces us to question the fundamental nature of the secrets we are told to ignore. It demands that we look closer at the blank spaces on the map.
Exactly. Which brings me to one final, deeply provocative thought for you to chew on as we wrap up. We talked extensively about how, historically, the military absolutely loved it when people believed in UFOs. They fostered the myth because it distracted the press and the public from the real stealth planes being built at Area 51.
The chicanery in the deserts.
Yeah.
The ultimate misdirection.
Right. Misdirection is their oldest and most effective tool. So if the government is suddenly so incredibly willing in 2025 and 2026 to declassify UAP files, to hold massive congressional hearings on live television, and to publicly admit they are tracking truly anomalous, physics-defying phenomena in our skies, what new, earthly, paradigm-shifting technologies are they currently testing at Groom Lake that this massive wave of UAP transparency is perfectly designed to distract us from?
If they are pointing at the sky with one hand, you have to ask what they are building with the other. It is the ultimate sleight of hand.
We started this hour by looking at a map, at a blank space in Nevada where geography was purposely erased. Maybe the real trick isn't hiding the blank space anymore. Maybe the trick in 2026 is pointing you toward the stars so you never look down at the salt flats.
This is Seek and Explain. Like, comments, and subscribe, and enjoy your